You are 60 years old. It is a Wednesday morning. For 35 years, 7:15 a.m. has sounded like the aggressive beep of a digital alarm, the hiss of a shower, and a heavy click of front door locking behind you. Today, it sounds like nothing. You are lying in bed, watching the dust motes dance in a shaft of light you've never noticed before, because you were always in your car when it hit this corner of the room. On paper, you've done it. You retired 5 years earlier than the standard script dictated. You had the number. You checked the spreadsheet. You shook the hands. But as you stand in the kitchen, brewing a cup of coffee that you don't have to drink in a travel mug, you feel a strange, vibrating static in your chest. You realize that you have just deleted the primary organizing principle of your identity. You aren't the director or the lead anymore. You are a man in a bathrobe, standing in a quiet kitchen. You look at your phone. There are no emails. There are no fires to put out. You realize that freedom at 60 feels suspiciously like irrelevance. Research on the retirement transition shows that the first 6 months are the most dangerous for a man's mental health. You have spent 4 decades building a professional ego, and you just killed it 5 years ahead of schedule. You realize that the $1.2 million in your 401k is a number, but your social utility was a feeling. You walk to the window and watch your neighbor pull out of his driveway. He's 45. He's leaning into the steering wheel, focused, hurried, needed. You feel a sharp, unexpected pang of jealousy, not for his job, but for his momentum. You realize that by retiring 5 years early, you didn't just buy time, you bought a vacuum. You are 60, healthy, and alert, but the world hasn't asked you for anything today, and it won't ask you for anything tomorrow. You realize level 1 isn't about the money. It's about the sudden, terrifying realization that you are no longer a participant in the world's labor. You are a spectator. You are 61. It is October. The market has been choppy, a word you use to read in news headers without feeling. Now, choppy means your net worth dropped by the price of a mid-sized sedan while you were eating lunch. You are sitting at your desk, looking at your brokerage account. You have to make your first major withdrawal to cover property taxes and the new roof. You realize that when you retire 5 years early, you are extraordinarily vulnerable to a phenomenon called sequence of returns risk. If the market drops 15% in your first 2 years of retirement, the math of your remaining 30 years changes forever. You aren't just losing money. You are losing compounding soldiers that can never be replaced. You do the math. If you had stayed at work for those 5 years, you would have been a buyer during this dip. Instead, you are a seller. You are cannibalizing your future to pay for your present. You realize that the 5 years you won are the most expensive years you will ever own. You go to dinner with friends who are still working. They talk about their bonuses. They talk about their upcoming projects. You find yourself quiet. You are calculating the cost of the steak against the market's closing bell. You realize that you have moved from a growth mindset to a preservation mindset, and preservation feels like fear. You are no longer building a tower. You're defending a fortress that is under a slow, invisible siege. You realize that by leaving the workforce at 60, you gave up your human capital, the ability to earn more to offset a bad market. You are now entirely at the mercy of a red and green line on a screen. You wake up at 3 a.m. and check the Nikkei index. You never cared about the Tokyo Stock Exchange before. Now, it feels like a pulse check on your own survival. You are 62. You are 3 years away from Medicare. This is the gray zone. You are looking at the bill for your private health insurance. It is a number that looks like a mortgage payment. When you were working, health insurance was a line item on a pay stub you barely glanced at. Now, it is a predatory animal that follows you every month. You realize that the 5-year early plan didn't account for the sheer cost of being an aging human in a system designed for the employed. You feel a twinge in your shoulder. In your 50s, you would have called a doctor. Now you hesitate. You calculate the deductible. You calculate the out-of-pocket maximum. You realize that you are self-insuring your own fragility. You find yourself walking more carefully. You stop skiing. You stop taking small physical risks, not because you're old, but because you are unprotected. You realize that retirement has made you physically timid. You see a former colleague at the pharmacy. He looks tired, but he has a company card and a gold PPO plan. He asks how retirement is. You say it's great. You use the word freedom a lot, but as you walk to your car, holding a generic prescription you search for coupons to afford, you realize that your freedom has a high maintenance cost. You have plenty of time to exercise, but you are more afraid of injury than ever before. You realize that those 5 years between 60 and 65 are the most expensive healthcare years of your life because you are too young for the safety net and too old for the invincibility of youth. You are a bridge that hasn't been finished yet. You are hanging over the water, waiting for 65 to reach the other side. You are 63. You have been retired for 3 years. You call a friend to grab lunch on a Tuesday. He can't. He's in a Q3 planning meeting. You call another. He's traveling for work. You realize that when you retire 5 years early, you are a pioneer whom no one followed. Your entire social circle is still in the arena. They are still vibrating with the stress and energy of the game. You are standing on the sidelines, holding a Gatorade, waiting for them to finish. You realize that your friendships were held together by the glue of shared struggle. You used to complain about the boss together. You used to celebrate the wins together. Now, when they talk about work, you have nothing to contribute. You see them look at their watches. They have to get back. You have the rest of the day. You realize that time wealth is lonely when everyone else is time poor. You find yourself spending more time at the hardware store, talking to the clerks just to hear the sound of another man's voice. You join a gym, but it's full of people 20 years younger than you who have their headphones in, or people 10 years older who are moving at a different speed. You are in a social no man's land. You realize that by exiting the workforce early, you disconnected the power to your social life. You are running on a battery that is slowly draining. You go home and sit on the porch. You realize that you have 5 years of extra life that you don't know how to fill. You've played the golf courses. You've read the books. You realize that purpose isn't something you find in a hobby. It's something that is demanded of you by others. And no one is demanding anything from you. You are 63, and you are realizing that 5 years of extra time is a lot of silence to fill. You are 64. You are 1 year away from the traditional finish line, but you've been in the locker room for 4 years already. You are sitting with a financial planner, or perhaps just a laptop and a cold cup of coffee. You're looking at the Social Security break-even chart. You realize that by retiring at 60, you created a massive tension between your savings and your benefits. Because you stopped working 5 years early, your primary insurance amount is lower. Those zero-income years are now baked into your 35-year average. You face the retiree's dilemma. If you take Social Security now, at 64, you lock in a permanent reduction in your monthly check. If you wait until 70 to maximize the benefit, you have to bleed your private portfolio dry for another 6 years. You realize that early retirement isn't a single event. It is a decade-long tactical struggle. You are watching your safe withdrawal rate get poked and prodded by inflation. You realize that those 5 years of salary you walked away from weren't just cash. They were the buffer that would have allowed you to sleep through a recession. You look at the graph of your projected wealth. In one version, the line stays steady. In the other, the one where the market stays flat for another 3 years, the line starts to curve toward zero when you hit 82. You realize that at 64, your biggest enemy isn't death, it's longevity. You are healthy. You might live to 95. And that possibility, which should be a blessing, feels like a financial threat. You realize that by retiring early, you extended the risk window of your life. You are a long-distance runner who sprinted the first mile and is now realizing just how far the finish line actually is. You are 65. The red, white, and blue card arrives in the mail. It is the official exit visa from the world of the young. You expected to feel relief, but instead, you feel a profound sense of categorization. You are now officially a senior. You realize that for the last 5 years, you've been pretending you were just on a long vacation. Now, the vacation is your permanent geography. You realize that your professional ghost has finally vanished. 5 years ago, people still called you for consulting or advice. Now, the industry has moved on. The software has changed. The people you mentored are now the ones making the decisions, and they don't remember your legend. You are no longer an expert. You are a historical footnote. This is the identity death that early retirement accelerates. While your peers are just now having their gold watch ceremonies and being celebrated, you are already forgotten. You go to a professional networking event out of habit, or perhaps desperation. You realize within 20 minutes that you are a ghost in the room. You speak the language, but the dialect has changed. You find yourself talking about how things used to be, and you see the polite, glazed-over look in the eyes of the 30-year-olds. You realize that your 5-year head start on retirement was actually a 5-year head start on becoming invisible. You aren't the man anymore. You are just a guy in a nice sweater. You drive home in the dark. You realize that success was a ladder you climbed for 40 years, only to find that the top of the ladder is just a roof, and it's very quiet up there. You realize that the work wasn't just about the money. It was the mirror you used to see yourself. Without the mirror, you don't recognize the man in the bathrobe. You are 67. You are watching your children, who are now in the thick of their own level 1 or level 2. They are stressed. They are worried about house prices and childcare. You have the money. You have the $76,000 or the $637,000 we talk about in the machine. You want to help, but you realize that because you retired 5 years early, you have to be a guard of your own hoard. You realize that early retirement is a selfish act, even if you didn't mean it to be. Every dollar you give to your kids is a dollar that can't stay in the market to protect you from the sequence of returns risk we met at 61. If you had worked those extra 5 years, you would have had the excess capital to change their lives. Instead, you have just enough to secure your own. You are wealthy enough to be comfortable, but too time-sensitive to be generous. You see your son working late, looking exhausted, and you realize you could have been his windfall, but you chose your Wednesday morning glitch at age 60 instead. You realize that the 5 years of freedom you bought for yourself were bought with inheritance you could have left for them. You are living in the opportunity cost of your own leisure. You realize that a legacy isn't just what you leave behind. It's what you were capable of doing while you were still here. You sit at your grandkid's birthday party. You are the fun grandpa because you have the time, but you aren't the powerful grandpa who can solve the family's problems. You realize that power is a function of active participation, and you opted out early. You are a king without a treasury. You realize that your time is worth a lot to you, but your input is worth less to them. You are 70. You have been retired for a decade. The 5-year gap is now a distant memory. You have survived the healthcare gap, the sequence of returns, and the identity death. You are sitting on the same porch where we started. You look at your hands. They are older, but they are steady. You realize that for 10 years, you have been mourning the man you used to be. You were obsessed with the cost of those 5 years. But then you remember a Tuesday when you were 62. It was a random afternoon in April. You spent 4 hours teaching your grandson how to skip stones at a lake. It wasn't on the calendar. It didn't produce anything. It didn't show up in a brokerage account. You realized that those 4 hours were only possible because you weren't in a Q2 planning meeting. You realize that the math of regret only works if you value money over moments. You realize that by retiring 5 years early, you accepted a smaller portfolio in exchange for a larger experience. You stopped being a resource and started being a presence. The world didn't need you to be a director. Your family needed you to be a witness. You realize that sovereignty isn't about having the most money at the end. It's about having the most self during the journey. You look at the sunset. It is 7 p.m. The house is quiet. The silence that used to feel like irrelevance now feels like peace. You realize that you didn't lose 5 years of work. You won 5 years of consciousness. You are a man who stood in the light of the refrigerator at 41 and decided that his life was worth more than his logistics. You are 70 years old. You are on the other side of the gap. And for the first time, you don't check the Nikkei. You just watch the light fade. The machine is closed.